The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, with one more interview for this Reading the Right series of score studies, this time with bass clarinetist Andrew Uren. For this month's score analysis, please check out my other post today on Patreon, where I've released the analysis in a separate video. Andrew is a phenomenon of New Zealand music, specializing in contemporary music performance on bass clarinet, and helping to develop its repertoire through the education, encouragement, and commissioning of composers. He's worked with several prominent chamber ensembles, most notably the bass register instrument collective 175 East, not to mention freelancing with nearly every professional orchestra in the country. He's also a sought-after soloist for both unaccompanied music and orchestral works. I recently recorded him in Auckland, demonstrating the entire clarinet family for my upcoming Mac Pro video course, Orchestration 103, Wind Instruments. After the session, we talked about his musical training and his perspectives on playing the bass clarinet in the Rite of Spring. All right, so today in the player's seat, we've got Andrew Uren on bass clarinet. And before we jump too deep into this, Andrew, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about yourself, like where you're playing right now, and how you got into bass clarinet as a musician, and a bit about your training.
Well, I'll go back to what inspired me with the bass clarinet. I was at university and I had a chance to play bass clarinet in a work which Eve de Castro Robinson had written, which was called Five Responses. And I was a third year student at the stage of I was a 4-year degree, and I was really anyway. She said, "Look, would I be interested in doing it?" So I borrowed a bass clarinet from Jim Langerby. He's a very good jazz sax player, and he was my teacher for saxophone as well. And it was a bass clarinet that went down to low E flat, and I just loved the sound. Mm-hmm. It was such an exciting instrument to play. The part was interesting. The ensemble, I enjoyed the ensemble, how it fitted in and the colour, and it just felt a bit more special than the clarinet, the regular clarinet. There was something about it that was special, and I thought, well, okay, I need to find out more about this instrument. Of course, we're talking 1990 then, 1990, right. No internet.
Right.
So this is so in those days, you went to the library and you looked up the bass clarinet in the books, in the encyclopedias, and you read stuff about it as much as you could about it. Mm-hmm. And that's what I did. And I tried to find out music that I could from different sources. And that was, of course, you had to do everything by writing letters to different people, organisations, and there wasn't a lot of stuff that I knew of at that time, or at least it was much slower means of getting information. But what I did find out was I found out about a man called Harry Spane, who was based in the Netherlands, and he had written a piece of music called Dune Landscape. And I managed to get hold of the copy of this music, and I think I must have picked it up at a clarinet conference somewhere. I don't know where I picked it up, but that's where I found it. And I started finding out as much as I could about the bass clarinet, everything I could get my hands on. I approached John Rimmer. Would he be keen to write a work? And he did. He wrote a piece called Hauturu, which is a solo piece for bass clarinet. And then I just started talking to people. I'd be really keen to play this. And they used to have Friday workshops and for the composers. And so I was asking them, please, I'd be really keen to write for this instrument. Now, of course, at that time, I was borrowing an instrument. So I thought, well, I had to bite the bullet and get an instrument. And I thought the best thing at the stage was to try and see if I could get a low C instrument, because this one only went to low E flat. And plus, Jim was being really kind, lending me his instrument. So, right. But I thought, well, okay, I need to get an instrument. So I got a Salma low C, and it was beautiful to play. It was a special. It was really good. The tuning was a little bit crazy on it, and there were some unusual aspects of it because it was where your little fingers were much higher than what your hand positions were. So I had to. What I used to do was get wine bottles and the corks and cut the corks in half so I could raise my fingers up to the right height with my little finger. And so I did that. I did an audition for Auckland Philharmonia. They didn't have a bass clarinet position at that time, and I got it some work. So and of course the first two pieces that I played was the first one on bass clarinet was Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony, which had a really good part.
Right.
And it was probably from there that I just started finding out. Well, I wanted to find about the orchestral side of things. So every time I would play a piece of music that had a bass clarinet, I would make a copy for my own personal reference. And I still have done this up till now, of course. But of course, a lot of this stuff now is online. You can it's accessible now. But that's what I used to do. And I'd go into the libraries. I'd get scores out, find out what were the extracts, what were the major bass clarinet pieces, and I would read about them. And so you'd find out about the Wagnerian bass clarinet part, which was incredibly virtuosic. It must have had a very virtuosic player because it goes up to a written top G. Strauss, same thing. His parts, great bass clarinet parts, really exciting. So it was at the time when I found a work by William Seidman for clarinet, doubling bass clarinet, and of course double bass. It was a duo, and we played this piece. There was a really good double bass player called Barry Green. I think it was Barry Green. Came up, we did a workshop with him, and anyway, it was from that I thought, well, I've really got to find out more about this instrument. It seemed like Harry Spane was the person. I also found out about a man called Joseph Horak, who was a Czech bass clarinet player, and I found that there's a whole lot of music that he had. Of course, you couldn't get this music. It was really hard to get it. It was very difficult to find. So you had all the Dutch bass clarinet music, and then you had all the stuff from the Czechoslovakia, which would have been around there, the Germanic sort of parts. So so I thought, well, I've got to bite the bullet. I made a recording of Harry's Dune Landscape. I learned, so I did that. I started just playing transcriptions. I did the Bach suite, cello suite, which works beautifully on the bass. I started doing that. Married to a cellist, so it's great. You got all those resources. And then I thought, well, okay, I need to do something with this. So I sent a tape over to Harry Spane, and he said, come over and study. So I went over to the Netherlands. This is in the early 90s, and and I remember going in that first lesson, and I played him Stravinsky 3 pieces on the bass clarinet, and he said, "That's great, well done, but we have our own repertoire," and that opened up the whole world. He sent me off to find a work by Issan Yuan called Monologue, another work, Sprechstatura by Gus Janssen, a Dutch composer, Enrique Raxach, a sort of a Dutch-Spanish composer, wrote a work in 1972 with stereophonic magnetic tape. And he said, you can pick up this music at a shop across the road, a place called Broekman Van Poppel, and also Dynamis, which was just around the corner, the publishing. So I remember going to those music shops, and I said, do you have any, being a bit tentative here, because you ask for bass clarinet music, and you expect, what are you talking about, that sort of thing. And the reply was, what letter? And I said, well, I'll start at the beginning. And so it was incredibly exciting. It was wonderful going to Dynamis, because you had, people could just write music and they could send it to Dynamis and they would publish it.
Right.
And okay, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether you don't like the piece or you like the piece. It's there, and it gives composers a creative outlook at that time, because there wasn't the same desktop publishing. It was so exciting, and it was exciting for a performer that was trying to find this repertoire. So I got all these pieces for bass clarinet, and I remember taking it back to Harry, and he said, "Okay, I want you to learn this for the first week." And I struggled. I worked because it was way up in the top register of the bass clarinet,
Right.
Going up to the altissimo and up and beyond. And I spent the first 2 days psychologically trying to get myself to even attempt this music because I'd never played notes that high on the bass.
Mm-hmm.
And then I just slowly worked at it bit by bit and struggled away, worked at it like a pickaxe, trying to dig through this forest and this thick forest, and you can't see the end or anything. And I took it back to him the following week, and it must have been terrible. It must have been terrible the way I played it. But anyway, the first thing he said, "Well done. These are the fingerings that I suggest you do."
Right.
And immediately, bam,
solved all your problems.
It worked it out. It suddenly was like I understood the whole logistics that the high notes on the bass clarinet are not that difficult. That was easy. And then suddenly you could start playing all the stuff at the top register, and that wasn't really a struggle. But the most important lesson that I actually got from that second lesson I had with him was that you're going to go back to your own country. There aren't any bass clarinet players around. You're going to be a pioneer in your country. There's no one else. There's me over here. There's someone else somewhere, and there's a few people that were learning at the time.
Right.
And you have to make it work. You have to find a solution. You've got to find a way to make this work. And that was a really good lesson because you get thrown scores and you get thrown pieces that are very difficult. And it's easy to say, oh, you just can't do this. But then you have to try and find a way. You've got to find a solution. Maybe it's a halfway thing. Maybe you can't really do what's on the page, even though when you do see something on the page, you want to get it right, because if you're trained as an orchestral player, there's an expectation that you can sit and sight read 95% of the music, and it's the 5% that you really have to be on top of the game, because that's the exposed bits. Those are the bits that count, and
right.
You have to know those, and those are the bits you have to really practice. Whereas you're getting a new piece from somebody, it's 100%. You've got to play the whole blinging thing,
right?
And you've got to work at it, and chip away at it. And some of these pieces took a long time to learn. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So after that, when we got back to New Zealand, there was this need for, I wanted to play. I had all this repertoire from Europe, incredibly exciting, and it also made me realise that some of the music that you hear in these countries is so, because I've had so many. The only thing I can put down is there's just such a struggle. I'm not saying people don't struggle in New Zealand, but when you think about all the wars and all the misery that has happened in Europe and those parts of the world, there's something very deep that sometimes gets left in the music that I kind of see, and it's very exciting. And then and it's something that you're starting to see. I think it's almost just people are starting to understand how to write, and for the bass clarinet in New Zealand. Again, it's a learning thing for them. We're all learning. I'm not putting them down or anything because
of course.
Because it's a learning process. But now you're getting. It's not like that now, because you've got people that are really very, very young, really understand how the instrument works. Very good writers, and so.
But I mean, you're part of that, right? Because you've been playing at symposiums,
yeah,
and showing young composers just what's possible on the bass clarinet,
yeah,
and then I suppose they go home and they write even harder than they did before.
Yes, they do. Or they challenge, or maybe they hear the sound, or I want this sound, and I'm going to write this. And that is like, I've got to try and reinterpret it, or ask them. And thank heavens you can ask them,
Sure.
Which is really important.
And you've also helped to establish something of a body of work of recordings here, like with Yves de Castro's Chaos of Delight.
Mm.
I think that was extremely influential for young composers to hear
Yes.
when it first came out. And you've got your own recordings as well, and you played on others and so on. So I think it's actually helping to establish a New Zealand bass clarinet repertoire.
Yeah, well, I kind of think of it as well. I mean, it's something that I love doing, but it's also exciting to see what a composer will write, because it's like a new book. No one's ever looked at this book, and it's like, this is so special to open a score and play it for the first time. Yeah.
And in addition to all that, you've got a bit of a history with the Rite of Spring.
I think I've played it, I think it was at least 10, 12 times, I think. And I've tended to play, I've always played the bass clarinet parts, but there's two parts. So the first bass clarinet just plays bass clarinet in its entirety, and the second bass clarinet is kind of like the bridge between the soprano clarinets, and does third clarinet. And so that person's role sort of jumps between that, playing with the first and second, and then also playing as helper for the solo or the first bass clarinet line.
So, are there any insights about it that, like, you as a player take away?
As a piece, whenever you get asked to play the Rite of Spring, it's always an exciting thing. It's exciting because there's always, I remember the first time playing it, the orchestra was like a big thing for that orchestra because it was pushing their boundaries. And I think a lot of people, when they play this piece, it is a challenge. It's initially a challenge, but now it's almost mainstream now because people know how to play it. They know how the style, they know how the sounds work. But that first initial playing through is always that challenge. And if you're coming to it as a first time, the counting, it's not like the orthodox 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 simple compound time. It's mixing all those times divisions together.
Right. But you have a lot of experience as a contemporary bass clarinetist, so you're probably used to counting and strange technique and like flutter tonguing and other kinds of things. So it's probably not as big of a stretch for you. But do you sort of see it as a test overall for the whole orchestra in that sense? Just like emotionally as well as physically.
I think the challenge of the piece is the ensemble, especially at the beginning. You've got all these. The piece starts off with the solo bassoon, and then of course the clarinet comes in with the bass clarinet, and it just sort of grows from there. It's like the birds waking up, the sounds, and it starts from that point, and it just grows, and that's the challenge. From a note perspective, it's possibly not as challenging as some of the contemporary scores that you can get confronted with.
Right.
But the challenge is being able to listen and react to what goes on. When you start, the bassoon starts, the clarinet comes in, then you've got the sounds coming from the trumpet from behind, and then you've got the strings aren't doing anything. They don't do anything for ages, and then the violins, that is, and you've just got this massive build-up, this sound, which sounds almost like it's like a cacophony, really, but it's not. It's just this building up, and it's growing and growing, and you're in some sort of bird sanctuary. It's dark, and all these different sounds are happening around you. And I think that's what the challenge is.
So, are there any particular challenges, just personally, for somebody playing the first or second bass clarinet part? That you would consider. I mean, maybe not after having played it 10 times, but what were some of the challenges going into it, like the first couple of times you played it?
Understanding, knowing what other people are doing, and the bass clarinets and the flat have got the main. They've got the main focus. The first and second clarinet, although they're kind of important, they're not like what those parts are. They're really the main parts in the clarinet section, the auxiliary. It's understanding how you are, where you're placing your part of the jigsaw, and as a section, as a clarinet section, you've got the whole section, but then you also got these mini sections. You've got the two bass clarinets working together. And you've got other sections of the orchestra that you kind of drop off and meet up with. So you've got all these. That's the thing that's the challenge of playing this.
So let's play a few parts from this. A few places where the bass clarinet is sort of solo, or it has something of an intricate part. And let's start off with just that really lovely place where even though I believe it's like more of an alto flute solo, the bass clarinets are both sort of kind of quivering around. It's the it's the bar after figure 6, or going into the second bar after figure 6.
Yeah, I should just point out, when after you've been playing, the other thing that's tricky about this piece is that sometimes you've got a part that might be fragmented, pass on to someone else.
Right.
So you've got this rhythmic thing that happens. Someone might be playing in a compound time, someone's playing a simple time, and that within that can be broken up, fragment. For example, just the clarinet and the flute, the oboe part, they've got this little section that happens. This is just before that clarinet, the bass clarinet solo line. You've got tiny little spots like that. Clarinet's doing demi-semi-quavers, bass clarinet locking into that. So you've got all these other little lines. But anyway, I'll play you this the little extract, the bass one. Now normally this is played with 2 bass clarinets, so I'm going to try and play it with 1. See what you think.
I always love that part because it sort of reminds me of a ball bouncing, and then sort of starting to bounce faster and faster as it gets lower and lower to the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a cool part. So what are some of the challenges of playing that? It seems like the fingering is kind of intricate.
First and foremost, you've got to be right on the mark with the timing. There's no room to be late. You cannot be early because there's so many other things that are coming in. And you've got to be able to lock in, like at the beginning, you've got a triplet. The second bass clarinet's got to lock in to just before it. There's a flute line. It's doing triplets, but you can't get put off by the cor anglais, which is playing in duplets. Right. So you've got this line that you're trying to pick up. And then, of course, once you start the quintuplet, you're on your own, really. And it's not until when the demi-semi-quavers kick in that that's where you have to be absolutely in time, metronomical, because other people are playing along with you. The cor anglais marking out where the quavers are, and you've just got to be right on the ticket. So that's the toughest bit.
It would almost be easier if it were just one player, wouldn't it? In some ways.
Yes, possibly, yeah. In some respects, it probably would. But the thing is, you've got a lot of notes. It's going across the break. You've got the F sharp to the C. And then coming down, making sure that the notes speak. That's the tricky thing. Making sure it sounds. It's got to sound. 2 bass clarinets have to sound like one. So yeah, it probably in some respects, if it was written in one part, it might be easier.
Right.
Yeah. There's bits after that where he breaks it into where you go into triplets, and the bass clarinet 1 and 2 go piano, piano. Just play a little bit of it so you can hear
sure.
it. Like that, it just carries on like that. Mm-hmm. You're doing that while the clarinets are in triplets as well. Mm-hmm. So the first bass clarinet part would be just written like this. And of course, the second part comes in after that. So you've got this line that's locking in together. So mm-hmm. You've got to make yourself sound like one super bass clarinet, I suppose.
Right, and it almost feels like if the listener is, most listeners who are not really looking at a score will actually be thinking that the beat there is like 2/4 time, like 1 and 2, or yep. 1 and 2 and or something like that.
1 and 2, yeah. It's almost in a hemiola sort of
So they and it sort of makes it all the more eerie when everybody breaks and the cor anglais just has a little comment, sort of almost a little dreary comment. Yeah, very cool. So can we jump forward to the end of part 1? And there's this really crazy part where everybody is just climbing on these 3/4 bars, and the music is accumulating bigger and bigger and bigger. And then towards the end, the clarinets go into a sort of arpeggiated chordal pattern, and with the bass clarinet on the bottom.
Okay, so leading into the section, yeah, you're quite right. You've from what's happening in this one, that you've got starting off, you've got with the bass clarinets, of course, are working a lot with the string, the lower strings here. But you've got this thing that's just this little figure that keeps growing. It starts.
Go ahead.
Starts, like that. It carries on that figure. Right. It's interesting, actually. There is a difference, even though it's unison, and it does just change. There are certain differences. For example, just after 75, bass clarinet 2 is staccato. Bass clarinet 1 is legato. So he wants the legato of it, but he just wants that attack that's happening. It's just a different way of just exaggerating the articulation. The bass clarinet 2 carries on doing that figure pretty much right to the end. And then the bass clarinet 1 jumps over to help the other clarinets, and this mad figure. There's this triplets that it starts coming and semiquavers that's happening in the other voices. Right. But the bass clarinet starts doing a different figure with the clarinets. Something like that, those sort of lines. That's all happening. All clarinet 1 and 2 and the bass is doing that. Bass 1 is doing that. Right. And then it just builds up, louder and louder, and then that's it.
And it's a brilliant. I feel it's a brilliant example of the clarinet register for bass clarinet, which a lot of people don't even imagine that it should be worth bothering writing in. But I think it's just such a brilliant place. It's so flexible and so usable. I mean, it's as usable as the clarinet's clarinet register in my way of thinking. It just depends on if you score for it in a good way. You know?
Yeah, there is a perception that the bass clarinet is a bass instrument in that it's area that most people from an orchestral point of view know it because of its low notes, its sounds, and all that. But in actual fact, it's got a very flexible range, and it can play the stuff that the clarinets can do. It's just whether in case you want that timbre or that, as you said, you want that timbre or that colour that at that point, if you want to use it. But it can do all this stuff, and it's
right, because the clarinet register for the bass clarinet is essentially the same area as the throat tones for the standard clarinet.
Correct.
Which you can play in a way that doesn't have that pinched sound. You know, it can play kind of a more full sound, not as penetrating, but still, still having like what I feel to be like a complete tone, rather than just sort of feeling like you're getting up to the end of the pipe. You know, which if you get used to that sound, you can really hear where that comes in.
Well, with the bigger bore, it helps that.
Yeah.
The bore, because it's just got more resonance, because you don't have that, as you said, what I call a very nasal quality.
Right.
Because you on the normal B flat clarinet, or even it's even exaggerated on the E flat clarinet. You're playing essentially a clarinet which is only how big is that? How many inches, centimeters? I don't know.
I think it's about 8 inches, or
it's not very long.
8 or 9 inches.
So you're playing something which is not. It's just a smaller sounding instrument. It's going to sound more nasally, and that's the effect.
Well, speaking of the E flat and the clarinet register, let's have a listen to from rehearsal mark 48. Let's listen to the bass clarinet part, which is actually playing 2 octaves below the D clarinet.
Yeah, that's right.
And let's listen to the quality there of the bass clarinet as as being in its low clarinet register, and how it goes down into its own throat tones, and how it really has kind of a different quality from the throat tones of a standard clarinet.
So you've got it's a beautiful little moment, this, because you've got this accompaniment. The flutes are doing this tremolo, and even the clarinets they do this sort of figure earlier, a similar part. I'm trying to think which instrument it's doing, but there's a tremolo that happens as well, and they have to dovetail it. So in this case, the flutes are kind of going from the alto flute is going into with the third flute, doing this tremolo, and it has to sort of carry on continuous motion. And the same thing happens earlier with the clarinet 2 and 3.
Right.
They have to do this figure, that same figure. So it's this beautiful shimmering effect, which provides a wonderful bed for this sound. It's of the E flat and the bass. It's just such a it feels it's primeval. That's the best way of describing it. The sounds with the octaves, modal, everything sort of points to it to being a sort of that pagan sound, I guess, which is what he's trying to get across.
How do you feel about tuning with your E flat partner when you're playing that?
You just have to make sure you know what your instrument's doing, and hopefully they do, and listen a lot. Work out where you're going to take your breaths. Some conductors are fussier about where you should take breaths, where your phrasing should end. Also the balance as well. The E flat's always going to cut through. It doesn't matter when everyone knows when an E flat clarinet's playing, but you have to make sure you're balancing that. So you have to support it. So even though the E flat is piano, you know that he's going to be when that register that they're playing. Then you've got to watch the pitch is going to be okay. The flatness of the top notes, the E flat, could be a problem, but then you've got the sharpness as well, and other notes. So you're always locking in and trying to find out where those notes are, and compromising. And then on top of that, of course, you've got this note that's happening underneath, which you need to be in tune with. So that's your fundamental. It's a tremolo, but it still has to be in tune. So
it sounds like a tricky passage.
Yeah. So the more you look at something, the more you start scratching the surface. Those are the things that are the challenges of this piece. And I'm talking about from a clarinet or even a bass clarinet perspective. So you think about every section of the orchestra is going through something like this, trying to finding their little thing to make it the right character. So if everyone does it, and everyone has that excitement and is prepared to go for it on the night, then you can have an absolute magical performance.
Let's jump forward to probably the other best-known bass clarinet solo, and that is just before the Sacrificial dance. And once again, I'm going to ask you to play both parts, both the first and second bass clarinet part. And in this case, the bass clarinet is coming off of sort of dovetailing into a unison.
It is. It's the two bass clarinets are working together, but you actually come in with the first clarinet in octaves, and you have to lock in at that point. If you're the second bass clarinet player, you have to lock into the first clarinet part. The challenge is because when you, as a bass clarinet player, you've got to come off a dotted a crotchet which is tied to a quaver, which is tied to a sextuplet, demi-semi quavers. So, and you've got to come off in time, and it's exposed. You're the only moving part apart from the other instruments, which are just kind of providing the beat, this downbeat. So that's the challenge of that bit. And it's quiet too. Everything's quiet. And when you've got on stage and you've got 80 to 90 players there, and it's your turn, everyone gets that turn. It's you're wanting to get it right. You're caring about the music, and you wanting to get that sound and get that right thing. So you've got the intonation thing to come in with the first clarinet player. You've got the rhythm to come in, and then of course the first bass clarinet player is listening as well to what the clarinet and the second bass clarinet's doing, so he can come in with that right figure as well.
Shall we have a listen to it?
Okay, let's have a go.
So that trade-off right there in the middle, past figure 141, is that also something that would it just be easier to play if by one player rather than two?
Look, it's one of those things where it's no one else plays. It's a bass clarinet 2 solo, so followed by first. It probably could easily be done on one instrument. I mean, it's one of those things that he could have put it in like that.
Right.
Maybe he wants to highlight the low F. So, and the first cut, the bit that goes, he wants that.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the fact that after that you've got to get from there up to an F an octave higher. So it could be the fact that he wants that figure to be really clear.
Right.
But you're still always going to have the problem. What do you do before 140? I suppose you've got the tremolo and you've got that figure
right.
that's going, and that carries through while the first bass player's got to go over the top. You've got that figure over the top, so you're always going to have this problem.
Right.
What do you do? Well, you could put it on an A clarinet, I suppose, down there, but yeah, I would probably say figure 143 here could have easily done that. Put it in one instrument.
Sure. I mean, if he's willing to lose part of that bar,
yeah.
Before 141, then
it's a trade-off. Yeah.
Yeah, it might be possible.
Yeah. That last little figure, the one, the number of times that you're asked to play this, different conductors asked for different things. One had a really good description. He described it as being like disappearing into smoke.
Right.
Like a figure going away. I've heard of people taking more time, or faster, or bang time. Lots of different figures, ways that they've asked you. Freer some. It's just what. It's depending. Some conductors are more fussy about that figure.
The way that I see it is time's up. That's it. It's time for the chosen one to dance herself
Indeed.
to death. Yeah. So that's what it signifies to me. Just like the end.
That's it.
And then she reacts.
Yeah. And it's great that very last note, that ba, it's the strings have got that figure. Ba, it's almost like as you described earlier about this trampoline sort of this bouncing ball.
Mm-hmm.
Ba. It's a great little figure, an excellent segue going from something which is a solo instrument to this tutti section and the change of mood. It's brilliant, really, the way he's done it. Going from one area to the next.
Do you have any other overall observations about this piece as a bass clarinet player, or just in general as a musician?
I think the piece is perceived as being harder than what it really is. I think from just on the surface of learning the notes and the rhythm, and I think the thing that you have to do is you have to feel that groove, and once you've got it, and if everyone else can feel it, then you've got it. Then it works. So this last section, ba 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 ba, that sort of thing, and knowing and keeping it. And if everyone's feeling that's really important. That works. That's one thing. The other thing is remembering what the piece is about.
Yeah.
Knowing, I mean, you can get wound up with all the nitty gritty of the piece, and that's really important because that's that's the crux of the piece. That's important, but
Yeah.
well, it's not the crux of the piece actually. It's important from the technical side of it, but you've got to remember what the piece is about and how what the idea behind it, the sacrifice, the build up to it. I'm not going to say that the piece is programmatic, but for me, when I think of if I use my imagination to what I feel the piece is about, that inspires me, and it's incredibly exciting. And when you get to the end, particularly that last note, that bam, and then just before that really big chord, you've got the flutes that do that ghostly little figure, and there's silence, and there's an almighty bam, which is the end. It shuts the door. It's like the tomb is closed. It's the end. Nothing can follow. It's just so strong and just so powerful in the writing. The other thing that I always notice about this one is there are always certain sections that are challenging, that you can almost, before you, because I've played the piece enough times now to know that there are certain sections that the conductor always looks at. There's one of those sections is, for example, 47. Just because people they sometimes make the 2/8 too long, so or it feels like a 3/8, and then people are late in the next entry, or they're not hearing, or an instrument speaks a bit late. There's a bit where, in 43, because everybody's rhythmical unison.
Mm-hmm.
Got this thing. But getting into it is always nasty, because you've got the clarinets. You've got everyone's doing a slightly different rhythm. Mm-hmm. Clarinet 1, it's got 6-tuplets. Clarinet 2 has got quintuplets. Clarinet 3 has got 4s. So, and then the piccolo's got even more. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So you've got a 7, 6, 5, 4, which they're doing. And then on the top of that, the oboes are doing this. And then someone's got to go and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, and then everyone's got to land on the at 43.
Right.
And it's always everybody's got to do that. So I was just thinking, if you're a brass player, and you're trying to think, when do I come in? It must be so hard.
That's right. Who's got the downbeat?
Yeah. And with the piccolo's at the top of the food chain, I suppose. So, but the piccolo's got a grace note, and everyone. So I suppose that's the thing to really listen for. But of course, it's knowing that. So that's always one of the nasty bits in the piece. Also, the very beginning of the very, very opening. It's not so much as much as the bassoonist has got it's all about the bassoon at the beginning.
Right.
But just the ensemble moving together, because you've got these ties. You've got bass clarinet 2 and clarinet 1 has got the kind of moving together, and then the E flat comes in, and then of course they dovetail.
Right.
And so you've got to know what the bassoon's doing. So at figure 1, where the 2 clarinets come in, you start off together, and that's all fine. That's moving together. And then after that, but it's knowing when, feeling the tie, knowing when that is.
Right.
And that's your next note. And the bass clarinet's doing this figure. That's where the other bass clarinet takes over there.
Right.
You've got to be listening to the solo. And again, you've got to be locking in with the second clarinet.
Right.
At that point there. It's easy, and then after that, at figure 3, everyone cuts off together. Thank heavens.
Right.
So it's just the ensemble moving that together, feeling the ties together, and you've got to be quite strong about where you feel the beat is. Yet it's got to lock into what the solid bassoon, not voice.
I interviewed a bassoonist at the beginning of this series, and he basically said that, yes, it does say rubato at the beginning, but actually Stravinsky writes out what the rubato should sound like. You're not supposed to deviate in any way from his very, very strange notation. If you play it exactly the way that it's scored, then it sounds like it's rubato. But if you were to actually rubato even further than that scoring, then it would sound wrong. So I don't know if that helps at all to figure out where you sit as you move against the bassoon part. But I imagine after a while you can just really sort of feel where they're going to put their beat that you can play off of.
Well, if you look at figure 1, for example, I mean, you've got what seems to be quite an easy rhythm in the clarinet parts, which is a crotchet tied to a quaver,
right,
with another quaver, which is then tied into a triplet. But if you look at the bassoon part, you've got this da, 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 da. Somewhere in the middle of that, that's where you should be playing that second note that you need to play. Which, I mean, that's when you have to really know, you have to subdivide, but you have to know that it's easy to get put off by what the bassoonist might be doing or whatever. So you have to be very strong as a section, as a clarinet section, that you're moving together at that point. But then you've got to make sure you keep that subdivision going.
Right.
But in a triplet sense in the next bar.
Right. But
you should be able to lock, and then you've got to lock into the bassoon part. So it's a case of knowing what the other parts are doing. If I was learning this music for a first time, I'd really want to see this page of the score and know what to expect and where to and what to be locking into, and knowing that it would be scary not to.
Right. I mean, it would almost be like useful if there were, like, if the bassoon part was over the clarinet parts as an ossia. If you could just really see where you fit. But of course, you have to sort of figure it out, I guess. Yeah. If you don't have that.
But as a professional, that's just taken for granted that you expected to. That's part of your homework. That's what you'd be expected to know, and
exactly.
You would know that even if it was your first time of actually doing a performance of it, you'd be expected that you would have done all that work.
Well, thanks very much for talking to us today, Andrew. And really, it's really great to get the perspective from the bass clarinetist. And since it's such an important part of this piece that we've been studying for the past few months, and really value your perspective.
Pleasure. It's a wonderful piece. It's always an exciting piece to play, and it's always interesting to have different takes on all the different conductors and how they perceive and what they find. And every time you play it, there's something new. There's some sound. What I always think is incredible as a parting sort of thing with this piece is that even though you might play this piece that many times, it's amazing when you get to a live performance, someone might be just a bit stronger, bring out a part of it more, and it creates a new colour and a new dimension to the piece, and that's really exciting. You just don't get that when you get your CD recording or your digital recording of this piece. You get this, you know what to expect, but when you get that live performance as a player, that's just so exciting when something like that surfaces and you didn't realise that, even though you might have played this piece a dozen times or more.
I really enjoyed visiting Andrew and recording his thoughts on performing the Rite of Spring. I hope to see you in a few weeks for our next chapter in this series with more score analysis, plus a further look at the history of the Rite of Spring in Prelude to a Riot.